When she stepped off the train, she wasn't expecting silence, but that's what met her, the kind of silence that meant everyone was watching. Clara Hallie Monroe stood on the wooden platform of Dry Bend Station, her worn leather boots finding purchase on boards bleached white by the Nevada sun. At 28, she cut an imposing figure tall for a woman, with shoulders that spoke of honest work rather than delicate needlepoint. Her brown hair, pinned severely beneath a practical bonnet, caught glints of copper in the harsh afternoon light. The train's whistle shrieked its departure, and black smoke billowed across the platform. Through the dissipating cloud, Clara surveyed her new home. Dry Bend stretched before her like a collection of sun-baked bones, wooden structures leaning against each other for support, their paint long since surrendered to wind and sand. She lifted her carpet bag, its leather sides bulging with everything she owned in this world. The advertisement, folded and refolded until the creases threatened to tear, pressed against her ribs from inside her bodice. Skilled cook wanted, it had read. Good wages for right person. Room and board included. Inquire at the Silver Dollar Saloon. Dry Bend, Nevada. The platform emptied quickly. Other passengers, a handful of miners, a traveling preacher, and a woman with 2 small children dispersed into the town without backward glances. Clara remained, scanning the dusty main street for any sign of welcome. There was none. The silence pressed against her ears, broken only by the distant piano notes drifting from what must be the saloon. She could feel eyes on her from windows, from doorways, from the cluster of men lounging outside what appeared to be the general store. Their gazes tracked her movement as she descended from the platform, her skirts stirring small clouds of dust with each step. Clara had expected many things when she'd left Ohio. She'd prepared herself for heat, for rough conditions, for crude men and hard work. But this silence, this weight of collective judgment before she'd even spoken a word that she hadn't anticipated. The main street stretched perhaps 200 yards, lined with false-fronted buildings that promised more substance than they delivered. She passed a barber shop, its striped pole faded to pink and gray. A livery stable exhaled the familiar scent of hay and horses. The general store's window displayed goods covered in a fine layer of dust, tins of tobacco, bolts of calico, a yellowed advertisement for Dr. Hamilton's Miracle Tonic. As she walked, Clara kept her spine straight, her chin level. She'd learned long ago that height could be either a burden or an advantage, depending on how one carried it. Today, she chose advantage. The Silver Dollar Saloon squatted at the far end of the street, its doors hanging open like a mouth mid-yawn. Unlike the other buildings, fresh paint gleamed on its sign, and the windows sparkled with recent cleaning. Music and laughter spilled onto the street, creating an island of life in the afternoon stillness. Clara paused at the threshold, allowing her eyes to adjust to the dimness within. The smell hit her first whiskey, sweat, tobacco, and something cooking that might have been stew, or might have been shoe leather. The piano she'd heard from the station tinkled away in the corner, played by a man whose enthusiasm far exceeded his skill. Every head in the place turned toward her. The piano stopped mid-chord. Clara counted perhaps 20 men scattered throughout the room at tables, along the bar, leaning against walls. Not a single woman in sight, save for herself. The silence stretched like taffy, sticky and uncomfortable. Well, a voice cut through the quiet, sharp as a straight razor. Look what the train dragged in. A woman emerged from behind the bar, short, stocky, with arms like ham hocks and a face that suggested she'd been sucking lemons since birth. Her graying hair was pulled back so tightly, it stretched her features into a permanent expression of displeasure. "You'd be Maudie Griggs," Clara said, pleased her voice came out steady. "That's Mrs. Griggs to you, girl. And you'd be the fool from Ohio who thinks she can cook." The woman's eyes raked Clara from bonnet to boots, lingering with particular disdain on her height. "Sweet mother of pearl, they grow 'em tall back east, don't they?" A ripple of laughter ran through the room. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral. "Clara Monroe, your advertisement said you needed a cook with skill." "What I need," Maudie said, planting her hands on her hips, "is someone who can make soup, not someone who'll break my doorframe just walking through it." More laughter. Louder this time. Clara's fingers tightened on her carpetbag handle. She'd heard worse. Endured worse. But she'd traveled 2,000 miles for this position. Spent her last dollar on the train ticket. "I can cook," she said simply. "And I've never broken a doorframe in my life." "Can you now?" Maudie's smile held all the warmth of a January blizzard. "And I suppose you think that's enough? You think these men want some—" She gestured vaguely at Clara's form. "Some tree of a woman serving their meals bad for business is what you are. Should have known better than to answer letters from desperate spinsters." The word hung in the air like a slap. Clara felt the familiar sting but refused to flinch. She'd been called spinster before. Old maid. Thornback. 28 and unmarried might as well have been a crime back in Ohio. She'd thought the West might be different. "I'm not desperate," Clara said quietly. "Just looking for honest work." "Honest work?" Maudie snorted. "Well, there's none here for you. Best get back on that train when it comes through Thursday." "Thursday's 3 days hence," Clara pointed out. "Where am I supposed to—" "Not my problem." Maudie turned back to the bar, dismissal clear in every line of her body. "Should have thought of that before you came uninvited." "Uninvited?" Clara pulled the advertisement from her bodice, unfolding it with trembling fingers. "This says—" "I know what it says. Changed my mind. Woman's prerogative." The silence returned. Heavier now. Weighted with Clara's humiliation and the crowd's uncomfortable entertainment. She stood there, carpetbag in one hand, useless piece of paper in the other, feeling every inch of her unnecessary height. "She can have the upstairs room." The voice came from the far corner, low and steady as distant thunder. Clara turned toward it, along with everyone else in the saloon. A man sat alone at a corner table, hat pulled low over his eyes. He hadn't been laughing with the others. She realized. Hadn't even been looking at her. His attention seemed focused on the glass of whiskey before him, which he rotated slowly between weathered hands. "It's mine," he continued, still not looking up. "But I ain't using it." Maudie's face darkened to the color of pickled beets. "Luke Keenan, you stay out of this. That room's paid through the month, and I won't have—" "Said it's mine." He looked up then, and Clara caught a glimpse of gray eyes beneath the hat brim. "Means I can do with it as I please. She can have it through Thursday." "Lucas, unless you're planning to refund my rent money." His tone remained mild, conversational, but something in it made Maudie's mouth snap shut. "Didn't think so." He stood, unfolding himself from the chair with the easy grace of a man accustomed to long hours in the saddle. Not especially tall, Clara noted with relief, but solid, built like someone who worked for his living rather than talked for it. Luke crossed to the bar, spurs chinking softly against the floorboards. He set his empty glass on the scarred wood and finally looked directly at Clara. His face was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, 32, sun-weathered but unlined save for the creases around his eyes. "Room's at the top of the stairs." He said, "Last door on the right. Lock works, which is more than most can say. There's blankets in the chest." Clara found her voice. "I can't take your room. Mr. Keenan, it wouldn't be proper." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his features. "Ma'am, you're standing in a saloon full of cowboys, miners, and Lord knows what else, with nowhere to sleep and a train not coming for 3 days. I'd say proper took the last stage out of town. But where will you? Got a bedroll and a sky full of stars." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture somehow both casual and courtly. "Room's yours if you want it." He moved past her toward the door, close enough that she caught the scent of leather and horse and something else sage. maybe, or prairie grass. At the threshold, he paused without turning. Word of advice, Miss Monroe, Maudie barks plenty, but she needs a cook bad enough to swallow her pride. Come morning, she'll be singing a different tune. He glanced back then, and she thought she saw the ghost of a smile. Assuming you can actually cook, that is. Then he was gone, leaving Clara standing in the middle of a silent saloon with a room key she hadn't asked for and a challenge she hadn't expected. Maudie's face had progressed from beet red to an alarming shade of purple. You, she jabbed a finger at Clara. Don't think this changes anything. Come morning, you're still getting on that train. Clara bent and picked up her carpetbag, straightening her spine once more. The eyes of every man in the saloon followed her movement, but the silence felt different now, less predatory, more curious. We'll see about that. Mrs. Griggs, she said. We'll see. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step a small declaration of intent. The last door on the right stood slightly ajar, revealing a small but clean room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the vast Nevada desert. On the chair beside the bed lay a man's coat, worn but well mended. A book rested face down on the small table. The Cattle Thief's Daughter, by someone whose name she couldn't make out in the fading light. Clear signs of recent habitation, of a life interrupted for her benefit. Clara set down her carpetbag and moved to the window. Below, she could see Luke Keenan leading his horse from the livery stable, bedroll tied behind the saddle. He swung up with practiced ease and turned the animal toward the setting sun without a backward glance. She folded his coat carefully, placing it at the foot of the bed. The book she closed gently, using a strip of leather she found on the table to mark his place. Small courtesies, but important ones. The bed, when she finally sat on it, proved surprisingly comfortable. Real sheets instead of rough blankets, and a pillow that smelled of sunshine and soap. Through the thin walls, she could hear the saloon returning to life below the piano starting up again, voices rising in conversation and argument. For the first time since leaving Ohio, Clara allowed herself a moment of complete stillness. She'd made it this far. She had a roof over her head, at least for tonight. Tomorrow, she'd show Maudie Griggs and everyone else in this sun-baked town what a tall spinster from Ohio could do with a kitchen and a chance. The desert wind picked up as darkness fell, whistling through gaps in the window frame. It sounded like promise. It sounded like home. Clara woke before dawn, her internal clock still set to Ohio time. Through the window, stars faded into a sky painted the color of fresh bruises, purple bleeding into pink, pink surrendering to gold. She dressed quietly, fingers working buttons by feel in the dim light, and pinned her hair with practiced efficiency. The saloon below lay silent as a church. Clara descended the stairs carefully, testing each board for creaks. The main room looked different in the morning light, smaller somehow, less intimidating. Chairs stood upended on tables like wooden spiders, and the floor bore the sticky residue of spilled beer and tracked-in dust. She found the kitchen through a door behind the bar. If the saloon had been disappointing, the kitchen was a revelation of neglect. Grease coated every surface like paint. Pots sat unwashed in a tub of water gone gray with age. The stove, a massive iron beast that should have been the heart of any kitchen, sat cold and sullen under layers of burnt food. Clara rolled up her sleeves. By the time Maudie Griggs stumbled downstairs 3 hours later, the transformation was well underway. The stove gleamed black as obsidian, already warming with a fresh fire. Pots soaked in water so hot it steamed, and the work table had been scrubbed until the wood grain showed through years of grime. What in the name of... Maudie stopped short in the doorway, her usual scowl replaced by something closer to confusion. Morning, Mrs. Griggs. Clara didn't look up from the biscuit dough she was kneading. I took the liberty of starting breakfast, found some bacon that wasn't entirely green, and the flour only had a few weevils. I picked them out. You can't just... Maudie seemed to be struggling with words, a condition Clara suspected was rare. "I told you, you're not welcome here." "And I heard you?" Clara shaped the dough with confident hands, cutting rounds with an empty tin can. "But seeing as I'm here until Thursday anyway, seemed wasteful not to cook, unless you'd prefer to explain to your customers why there's no breakfast." As if summoned by the mention of food, voices began filtering in from the main room, the morning crowd. Clara guessed workers heading to the mines, ranch hands starting their day. "Maudie!" someone bellowed. "Coffee ready smells like actual food in there for once." Maudie's face went through several interesting color changes before settling on resignation. "Fine," she spat. "But one meal doesn't mean anything, and don't expect to get paid for it." Clara slid the biscuits into the oven and turned her attention to the bacon, laying strips in a cast-iron skillet with the reverence of a priest handling communion wafers. Wouldn't dream of it. Mrs. Griggs. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Clara had cooked for harvest crews back home, 20 men at a time who ate like they'd never see food again. Compared to that, the saloon's morning crowd was manageable. She sent out plates of eggs cooked to order, biscuits that steamed when broken open, bacon crisp enough to shatter, and coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. The compliments started as murmurs and grew to declarations. "Maudie, where'd you find this angel?" "Best damn biscuits I've had since my mama passed." "This coffee could wake the dead and make 'em dance." Clara stayed in the kitchen, letting Maudie's sullen daughter Agnes serve the food. She could hear Maudie deflecting the compliments with increasingly creative grumbles, but the cash box rang steadily, and that spoke louder than words. Around 9 o'clock, when the rush had died to a trickle, Agnes poked her head into the kitchen. At 17, she had her mother's stocky build but none of her sourness, though she seemed to be working on developing it. "Mama says to tell you—" Agnes paused, clearly editing. "She says you can stay through breakfast tomorrow, to earn your keep for the room." Clara nodded, hiding her smile in the dishwater. "Thank you. Agnes, there's fresh biscuits on the warming rack if you're hungry." The girl's eyes widened slightly, apparently. Kindness was as rare as good cooking in the Griggs establishment. She grabbed 2 biscuits and fled. Clara had just finished the last of the dishes when she heard boots on the kitchen's back step. The door opened without a knock, and Luke Keenan ducked inside, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. "Miss Monroe." He looked around the transformed kitchen with those steady gray eyes. "Heard you caused quite a stir this morning." "Just breakfast, Mr. Keenan." Clara dried her hands on her apron, acutely aware of how she must look face flushed from the stove's heat, hair escaping its pins, sleeves rolled up like a washerwoman's. "Just breakfast." He repeated the words like he was tasting them. Hank Morrison said it was the best meal he'd had in years. Course, Hank's been known to exaggerate, but seeing as he asked for thirds. "Is there something you need?" Clara asked, then caught herself. "Not that you're not welcome. It's your room I'm sleeping in. After all—" About that, Luke shifted his weight, and Clara realized with surprise that he might actually be uncomfortable. Wanted to make sure there weren't any troubles. Some of the boys can get rowdy at night. "The lock works. As you said, I was fine." "Good." He cleared his throat. "Also wanted to say what I mentioned yesterday. About Maudie coming around, looks like I might have been right." "One meal doesn't mean anything." Clara echoed Maudie's words. "No," Luke agreed. "But it's a start." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You really pick weevils out of the flour?" "Every last one." A smile ghosted across his features there and gone like a hawk's shadow. "My grandmother used to do that. Said it was the difference between cooking and caring." Before Clara could respond, he was gone, leaving only the faint scent of sage in his wake. The afternoon stretched long and quiet. Clara found cleaning supplies and attacked the dining room with military precision. She was on her knees scrubbing table legs when she heard voices from the bar. Don't know what Maudie's thinking. A man's voice, slurred with day drinking. Bad enough we got to look at that scarecrow while we eat. Careful, Dale. Another voice, amused. That scarecrow cooks better than anyone in 3 counties. Don't make her less of an eyesore. Woman that tall ain't natural. Probably can't even birth babies. Built like a man as she is. Clara's hand stilled on the rag. She'd heard worse. She reminded herself. Had heard worse just yesterday. That's enough. A third voice, quiet but firm. Luke Keenan. Lady's doing honest work. No call to speak ill of her. Oh ho! Dale's voice pitched higher with mock surprise. Got yourself a defender. Has she sweet on the beanpole? Luke. I'm sweet on breakfast that doesn't taste like boot leather. Now finish your drink and move on. Dale, you're stinking up the place. There was a scrape of chairs, muttered curses, the slam of the saloon doors. Clara remained frozen, water soaking through her skirt where she knelt. You can come out, Miss Monroe. Luke's voice carried clearly. He's gone. Heat flooded Clara's face. She stood slowly, knees protesting, and emerged from the dining room with as much dignity as she could muster. Luke sat at the bar, a fresh whiskey before him. They regarded each other across the empty room. You didn't have to do that, she said finally. Didn't do it for you. He took a sip of whiskey. Did it because Dale Hutchins is a mean drunk who'd insult his own mother for sport? Man like that needs regular reminding of his manners. Still, thank you. He shrugged. You planning to scrub the whole place? It needs it. That it does, but Rome wasn't built in a day, and the silver dollar's been accumulating dirt since before the war. Pace yourself. Clara looked around the room, seeing it through his eyes the overwhelming task she'd set herself, the futility of trying to clean years of neglect in an afternoon. I like keeping busy, she said simply. I noticed. He finished his drink and stood. Word of advice. She waited. Save your energy for the cooking. That's what'll win Maudie over, not the cleaning. She's got Agnes for that. When she can pin the girl down long enough. And if cooking's not enough, Luke settled his hat on his head, considering. Then you get on Thursday's train and find some place that appreciates what you've got to offer. World's full of people who need feeding. Miss Monroe, not all of them are fools about who does the feeding. He touched his hat brim and left, spurs marking his passage like punctuation. Clara stood alone in the empty saloon, afternoon light slanting through windows she'd cleaned that morning. Her knees ached, her back protested, and her hands were raw from lye soap. But in the kitchen waited flour weevil-free now, fresh eggs from someone's chickens, and the possibility of proving herself with more than just one breakfast. She rolled down her sleeves, repinned her hair, and went back to work. That evening, when the dinner crowd filled the saloon, Clara sent out plates of beef stew that had simmered all afternoon, cornbread that crumbled golden between the fingers, and apple pie made from fruit she'd found forgotten in the cellar. The compliments rang louder than the mornings, and Maudie's scowl deepened with every satisfied customer. Don't think this changes anything, Maudie hissed when she came to collect another order. You're still too tall, too plain, and too much trouble. Yes, Mrs. Griggs, Clara said mildly, ladling stew into bowls. Though I notice you're not turning away the money. Maudie's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. She grabbed the plates and stormed out, leaving Clara to smile at her stew pot. Maybe she was too tall. Maybe she was too plain. Maybe she was more trouble than Drybend had bargained for. But Lord have mercy, she could cook. The room at the top of the stairs had become Clara's sanctuary. After the dinner rush ended and the saloon settled into its nightly routine of cards and whiskey, she would climb those worn steps and close the door on the world below. In the lamplight, Luke Keenan's abandoned space revealed itself in small details: a shaving mirror on the washstand, spare shirts folded in the drawer, that book still waiting to be finished. She'd moved his belongings carefully to one corner, stacking them neat as a shopkeeper's inventory. The coat she'd found that first night now hung on a peg by the door, and she caught herself glancing at it sometimes, wondering where its owner slept under those endless Nevada stars. 3 days had passed since her arrival, and Thursday's train would come tomorrow. Maudie hadn't mentioned it again, too busy counting the increased profits from Clara's cooking, but the deadline hung between them like smoke in the air. Clara sat on the narrow bed, unlacing her boots by lamplight. Her feet ached from another day on the kitchen's hard floor. But it was a good ache, the kind that came from useful work. Through the thin walls, she could hear the murmur of voices, the clink of glasses, someone's rough laughter. The sounds had become familiar already, almost comforting. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Clara froze. Boot half off. In 3 days, no one had come to her door after dark. "Miss Monroe," Agnes's voice, tentative. "You decent?" Clara quickly relaced her boot and opened the door. Agnes stood in the hallway, twisting her hands in her apron. "What is it?" Clara kept her voice low. If Maudie knew her daughter was here. "Mama's gone to bed with one of her headaches." Agnes glanced nervously down the stairs. "I was wondering, that is, if you wouldn't mind, could you teach me—" "Teach you? To cook like you do." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I can make basic things, but nothing that tastes like what you make. And someday I want to leave here, find work somewhere else. But I need skills, real skills." Clara studied the girl's earnest face. "Your mother wouldn't approve." "Mama doesn't approve of anything. Please, Miss Monroe, I can pay you." She pulled a handful of coins from her pocket. "It's not much, but—" "Keep your money." Clara stepped back, opening the door wider. "But if we're going to do this, we do it properly. Can you read and write?" Agnes nodded eagerly. "Good. First lesson is free. After that, you pay me by writing down every recipe I teach you. Deal." "Deal." Agnes's face lit up like Christmas morning. They spent the next hour huddled over the small table, Clara sketching out the basics of biscuit making while Agnes took notes in careful script. The girl proved a quick study, asking intelligent questions about measurements and timing. "The secret," Clara explained, "isn't in the recipe. It's in the handling. Biscuits need a light touch. Work the dough too much and you'll get rocks instead of clouds." "Clouds," Agnes repeated, writing it down. "That's pretty. My grandmother's word. She taught me everything I know." Clara smiled at the memory. Said cooking was like conversation. You had to know when to speak up and when to stay quiet. Agnes was about to respond when heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs. She went pale. "Oh no, if Mama finds me here." "Window," Clara whispered, but it was too late. The footsteps had stopped outside the door. Another knock, heavier than Agnes's tentative tap. "Miss Monroe, it's Luke Keenan." Agnes's eyes went wide as saucers. Clara motioned for her to stay quiet and opened the door a crack. "Mr. Keenan." "Sorry to disturb." He held something in his hands, leather. From what she could see, brought something that needs mending, if you're willing. Clara glanced back at Agnes, who had pressed herself against the wall like she could disappear into it. There was no hiding her, not in this tiny room. "You can come in," she said finally, opening the door fully. Luke stepped inside, then stopped short when he saw Agnes. His eyebrows rose slightly, but that was his only reaction. "Evening, Agnes." "Mr. Keenan." The girl's voice came out as a squeak. Luke looked between them, taking in the papers on the table, the pencil in Agnes's hand. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Learning the trade?" he asked mildly. Agnes nodded miserably, clearly expecting judgment or worse, a report to her mother. "Good." Luke set the leather item a saddlebag. Clara could see now on the table. Woman needs skills in this world. Cooking's as good as any. Better than most. Agnes blinked. You won't tell Mama. What's to tell, far as I know? I came up here to ask Miss Monroe about some mending. Found her reading. He glanced at the book on the nightstand. That book any good? By the way, it took Clara a moment to realize he was asking her. Oh, I haven't. That is, it's yours. I wouldn't presume. It's about a cattle thief's daughter who becomes a sheriff. He shrugged. Pretty far-fetched, but entertaining. You're welcome to it if you like. An awkward silence fell. Agnes gathered her papers hastily. I should go. Thank you, Miss Monroe, for the reading. She slipped past Luke and clattered down the stairs, leaving Clara alone with the cowboy in her small room. The impropriety of it struck her suddenly. Unmarried woman, unmarried man, closed door. In Ohio, her reputation would be in tatters. But this wasn't Ohio. The saddlebag, she prompted, needing something to fill the silence. Right. Luke picked it up, showing her a long tear in the leather. Caught it on some mesquite. I could patch it myself, but... He gestured at her neat stitching on a tablecloth she'd been mending. Figured you'd do a better job. Clara examined the tear with professional interest. I can fix this, but it'll need a proper leather needle. I don't suppose... General Store'll have one. I'll pick it up tomorrow. He paused. That was kind. What you're doing for Agnes. She's a bright girl. Deserves better than this place. Most folks do. He moved toward the door, then turned back. Speaking of tomorrow, the train comes at noon. Clara's stomach tightened. I know. Maudie mention anything about it? No. Luke studied her for a moment. Well, if she does, might be worth mentioning that Harvey Boone's coming to town Friday. Harvey Boone. Man who posted the advertisement. The one Maudie answered for him. He's been up in Carson City, but word is he's heading back to check on his investment. Clara frowned. His investment, I thought, Mrs. Griggs owned the saloon. She runs it. Harvey owns it, along with half the buildings on Main Street. Luke's expression darkened. Man likes to keep his fingers in many pies, not all of them wholesome. And he's the one who wrote to me about the position? Would have been. Harvey handles all the business correspondence. Maudie can barely write her own name. Understanding dawned slowly. So when she said she changed her mind, she never had a mind to change. Harvey hired you, sight unseen. Maudie just had to deal with what showed up. Clara sank onto the bed, processing this information. Why are you telling me this? Luke seemed to consider his words carefully. Because Harvey Boone's a businessman. He cares about profit, nothing else. And from what I hear, the silver dollars made more money in 3 days than it usually sees in a week. So maybe it's worth sticking around until Friday. See what the man who actually hired you has to say. Clara looked up at him, this quiet cowboy who kept finding reasons to help her. Why do you care what happens to me? Something flickered across his face there and gone too quickly to read. I don't like seeing good people run off by small minds. World's got too few cooks who can make biscuits like clouds. He touched his hat brim and left, pulling the door closed behind him. Clara sat in the lamplight, turning his words over in her mind. Tomorrow the train would come. Tomorrow she had to decide. She picked up the book he'd left behind, The Cattle Thief's Daughter, by E. Marlitt. The pages fell open to where she'd marked his place. Despite herself, she began to read, losing herself in the story of a woman who defied expectations in her own way. When she finally set the book aside and prepared for bed, Clara found herself thinking not of tomorrow's train or Harvey Boone's arrival, but of gray eyes and quiet kindness, of a man who gave up his room for a stranger and thought girls like Agnes deserved to learn. The wind picked up outside, rattling the window in its frame. Somewhere in that vast darkness, Luke Keenan slept under the stars he'd chosen over a roof and walls. Clara pulled the blanket higher, surrounded by the small signs of his presence, the coat on its peg, the extra shirts, the faint scent of sage that seemed to linger in the fabric. For the first time since leaving Ohio, she didn't feel alone. The lamp flame flickered, casting shadows on the wall. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, in this borrowed room with its simple comforts and unexpected kindness, Clara Monroe allowed herself something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. She smiled in the darkness, thinking of Agnes's eager face, of recipes written in careful script, of biscuits like clouds. Perhaps there was a place for her here after all. Perhaps being too tall and too plain mattered less than being able to feed people well. Perhaps Thursday's train would leave without her. Thursday morning arrived with a cloudless sky and the distant wail of a train whistle. Clara stood at her window, watching the sunrise paint the desert in shades of copper and gold. Her carpetbag sat packed by the door, ready for a departure she hadn't yet decided on. The kitchen welcomed her like an old friend. She'd grown familiar with its quirks in just 4 days: the stove door that stuck unless lifted just so, the uneven floorboard near the pantry, the way morning light slanted through the eastern window. She started the coffee and began mixing biscuit dough, her hands moving without conscious thought. "You're up early." Maudie's voice from the doorway lacked its usual venom. The older woman looked tired, shadows dark under her eyes. "Same as always, Mrs. Griggs." Clara shaped the dough with practiced motions. "The miners expect their breakfast." "The train comes at noon." "I know." They worked in unusual silence, Maudie setting out plates while Clara cooked. The routine they'd developed over the past days continued smoothly, neither acknowledging that it might be the last time. When the breakfast rush hit, Clara lost herself in the familiar rhythm. Eggs over easy for Tom Garrett, extra bacon for the Paulson brothers, coffee black as midnight for everyone except young Jamie Mills, who took his with enough sugar to stand a spoon in. She was pulling a fresh batch of biscuits from the oven when Agnes appeared at her elbow. "Miss Monroe," the girl's voice trembled slightly. "There's someone asking for you, in the dining room." Clara's hands stilled. Had Harvey Boone arrived early? She smoothed her apron and stepped through the door. Luke Keenan sat at a corner table, hat beside him, working his way through a plate of eggs and bacon. He looked up when she approached. "Morning, Miss Monroe. Thought I'd catch breakfast before the train." Something in his tone made her wary. "Is there a problem with your meal?" "No, ma'am. Best in the territory, as always." He reached into his vest pocket. "Got that needle you needed, for the leather work." He placed a small paper packet on the table. Clara stared at it, then at him. "Mr. Keenan, I might be leaving in 3 hours." "Might be." He returned to his eggs. "Then again, might not. Either way, needle's yours. Paid for already." "I can't accept." "You ever mended a saddle before, Miss Monroe?" The change of subject threw her. No. It's not like fabric. Leather's got a mind of its own. You gotta work with it, not against it. Force it, and it'll split wider than before." He looked up at her then, gray eyes serious. "Sometimes other things are like that too. Towns, people. You gotta give them time to ease into new ideas." Before Clara could respond, a commotion erupted from the kitchen. Maudie's voice rose in panic. Clara, get in here!" Clara rushed back to find Maudie bent over a telegram, face white as flour. "Harvey's coming," Maudie said. "Today, this afternoon, and he's bringing investors from Sacramento. They want to see the place, see how it's running." "That's good. Isn't it? Business has been excellent." "You don't understand." Maudie sank onto a stool. "Harvey expects things a certain way, fancy, like those restaurants in San Francisco he's always going on about. Look at this place." She gestured helplessly at the simple kitchen. "Look at me, I don't know how to—" Clara had never seen Maudie Griggs lost for words. It was unsettling, like watching a mountain crumble. "What exactly does Mr. Boone expect?" "White tablecloths, china plates, Food with French names I can't even pronounce. Maudie's laugh held an edge of hysteria. He sent me a menu once. Might as well have been written in Chinese. Clara glanced at the clock. 3 hours until the train. 3 hours to transform a frontier saloon into something that could impress city investors. It was impossible, which perversely made her want to try. "Agnes," Clara called. The girl appeared instantly. "Run to the general store. We need every white sheet they have. Tell Mr. Patterson it's an emergency and I'll pay him tomorrow." "But," Agnes looked at her mother. "Go," Maudie and Clara said in unison. As Agnes fled, Clara turned to Maudie. "Do you still have that menu, the one Harvey sent?" Maudie nodded, scrambling to a drawer. "Never threw it out. Kept thinking maybe someday." Clara scanned the list, translating the pretentious French in her head. Consommé was just clear soup. Fricassee meant stewed chicken. Pomme duchesse, mashed potatoes piped fancy. "This is doable," she muttered. "You can read this." Maudie stared at her. "You can cook this." "I worked for a judge's family in Cincinnati before coming west. His wife entertained extensively." Clara's mind was already working, adapting recipes to available ingredients. "But I'll need help. Lots of it." "Anything. Send someone to every ranch within riding distance. I need fresh cream, butter, the best beef they have, and chicken's young ones if possible." "Luke's still here. He knows everyone." "Good. Ask him." Clara rolled up her sleeves. "We have work to do." The next 3 hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Luke not only agreed to help but recruited half the town. Ranch wives arrived with baskets of fresh vegetables from their kitchen gardens. The blacksmith's son appeared with a crate of eggs. Even Dale Hutchins, the man who'd called her a scarecrow, showed up with 2 plump chickens and a mumbled apology. Clara orchestrated it all like a conductor with an orchestra. She set Agnes to polishing every piece of silver in the place. Maudie pressed tablecloths improvised from sheets. 2 of the saloon girls who usually didn't appear until evening came down to help arrange wildflowers in whatever vessels could pass for vases. In the kitchen, Clara worked magic with limited resources. The clear soup became a delicate broth flavored with herbs from someone's garden. The chicken fricassee simmered in cream sauce that would have done credit to any San Francisco restaurant. She even managed the pomme duchesse, piping the potatoes through a makeshift pastry bag fashioned from clean muslin. Luke appeared periodically with supplies, sleeves rolled up, hat abandoned somewhere. "Need anything else?" "A miracle," Clara said, whisking sauce with one hand while checking the oven with the other. "Fresh out of those. Will another side of beef do?" "Despite everything," she laughed. "That'll work." At 11:30, as she was putting finishing touches on the second course, Clara realized something. The train whistle had sounded 10 minutes ago. The noon train had arrived, and she hadn't even noticed. "Aren't you going to—" Agnes started, then trailed off at Clara's look. "Going to what we have investors coming." Clara handed her a tray of perfectly arranged hors d'oeuvres. "Mind the parsley. It bruises easily." By 2 o'clock, when Harvey Boone's carriage pulled up outside, the Silver Dollar Saloon had been transformed. White tablecloths gleamed on every surface. Silverware sparkled. The rough floorboards had been scrubbed until they shone, and strategic placement of potted plants borrowed from the hotel hid the worst of the wall stains. Clara watched from the kitchen door as Harvey entered, a thin man with pomaded hair and a suit that cost more than most folks saw in a year. 3 other men followed, equally well-dressed, carrying themselves with the casual arrogance of wealth. "Gentlemen," Harvey's voice carried clearly, "welcome to my establishment. As you can see, we maintain the highest standards even here on the frontier." Maudie, transformed in her best dress with her hair properly styled for once, greeted them with surprising grace. "Mr. Boone, gentlemen, we're honored by your visit." "Mrs. Griggs," Harvey's tone held faint surprise. "The place looks different." We've made some improvements since your last visit. Shall I show you to your table? Clara retreated to her kitchen, heart hammering. Everything depended on the next hour. Through the serving window, she could see Luke taking a position at the bar, ostensibly nursing a whiskey but clearly standing guard. The first course went out the consommé, crystal clear and steaming in china bowls borrowed from the hotel. Clara held her breath until Agnes returned. They loved it, the girl whispered. One of them said it was better than the Palace Hotel. Course after course followed, each one meeting with approval. Clara pushed aside exhaustion, focused only on the next dish, the next sauce, the next perfect presentation. She was plating the final course, a apple tart that had pushed her skills to their limit when Luke appeared in the kitchen. Thought you should know, he said quietly. Harvey's asking who the cook is. Wants to meet you. Clara's hand stilled. I can't. Look at me. She gestured at her stained apron, her hair escaping its pins, the sweat on her forehead. You look like someone who just pulled off a miracle. Luke's expression was unreadable. Come on. Can't hide in the kitchen forever. He was right. Clara removed her apron, attempted to tidy her hair, and followed him to the dining room. The investors sat back in their chairs, the satisfied look of well-fed men on their faces. Harvey rose as she approached, his sharp eyes taking in every detail of her appearance. So, he said slowly, you're the cook who answered my advertisement. Clara Monroe, Mr. Boone. Miss Monroe. He circled her slowly, like a buyer examining a horse. You're not quite what I expected. Few things are out here. One of the investors laughed. She's got you there. Harvey, nothing in this meal was what I expected either, and thank God for it. Best food I've had outside San Francisco. Indeed. Harvey's expression remained neutral. Tell me, Miss Monroe, where did you train? Cincinnati, primarily, before that. My grandmother's kitchen in Ohio. And you can maintain this standard daily, with proper supplies and equipment. Yes. Harvey glanced at Maudie. Mrs. Griggs. A word in private. They stepped aside, leaving Clara standing awkwardly before the investors. One of them, an older man with kind eyes, smiled at her. That apple tart, young lady, would you consider selling the recipe? I'm afraid not, sir. Family recipes stay in the family. Smart woman, he chuckled. Harvey's lucky to have found you. When Harvey returned, his businessman's smile was firmly in place. Miss Monroe, it seems we need to discuss your employment. The position is yours, if you want it. Room, board, and wages as advertised. Clara felt her knees go weak with relief. Thank you, Mr. Boone. Don't thank me yet. I expect excellence every day. No excuses, no exceptions. His smile sharpened. Disappoint me, and you'll be on the next train out. Clear. Crystal clear. Good. He turned to his investors. Gentlemen, shall we discuss business? Dismissed. Clara made her way back to the kitchen on unsteady legs. She found Luke there, sleeves still rolled up, washing dishes. You don't have to do that, she said. Wanted to. He didn't look up from his task. Besides, figured you'd need clean plates for tomorrow. Tomorrow. She had a tomorrow here now. The reality of it hit her suddenly, and she sank onto the stool Maudie had vacated earlier. I missed the train, she said wonderingly. That you did. Luke dried his hands, finally meeting her eyes. Regret it. Clara thought about the last 3 hours, the chaos, the pressure, the sheer impossibility of what they'd accomplished. Then she thought about Agnes's eager face, about the townspeople who'd rallied to help, about the quiet cowboy who washed dishes without being asked. No, she said softly. No regrets. Luke smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered features. Good, because that leather's not going to mend itself, and I'm partial to that saddlebag. Clara laughed, exhaustion and relief making her giddy. I'll need that needle after all. Already on your table upstairs. He headed for the door, pausing to look back. Welcome to Dry Bend, Miss Monroe, officially. After he left, Clara sat in her kitchen now, and listened to the voices from the dining room, the clink of glasses, the satisfied sounds of well-fed men talking business. She'd done it. She'd proven herself with more than just good cooking. Agnes peeked around the door. Mama says to tell you she's sorry. For everything. Tell her it's forgotten. Really? Really, we've got bigger things to worry about now. Like teaching you to make pomme duchesse before Mr. Boone visits again. Agnes's face lit up. You mean I can keep learning? Every evening, if you like. But first, help me clean up this chaos. They worked side by side as afternoon faded to evening, transforming the kitchen back to its normal state. The fancy dishes went back to the hotel. The borrowed silver was wrapped and stored. The white tablecloths folded away for the next special occasion. By the time Clara climbed the stairs to her room, truly, her room now stars were beginning to appear in the desert sky. On her table sat the packet of leather needles, a promise of work to come. Beside it, someone had left a small bouquet of desert wildflowers in a mason jar. No note, but Clara knew who'd left them. She touched one delicate bloom, smiling. She'd found her place at last, not despite being too tall or too plain or too much trouble, but perhaps because of those very things, because she could work hard and stand tall and make impossible things possible. The train whistle sounded in the distance, the evening freight, not stopping in Dry Bend. Clara listened to it fade into the desert night, carrying away the last of her doubts. She was home. 2 weeks had passed since Harvey Boone's visit, and Clara had settled into a rhythm at the Silver Dollar. The kitchen was truly hers now, reorganized and scrubbed until it gleamed. Even Maudie had stopped hovering, trusting Clara to manage the meals without supervision. But success brought its own challenges. Did you hear what they're saying? Agnes whispered one morning, glancing toward the dining room where the breakfast crowd gathered. About you and Mr. Keenan. Clara's hands didn't pause in their kneading. People talk, Agnes. It's what they do in small towns. But they're saying that you and he... The girl's face flushed red. I know what they're saying. Clara shaped the bread dough with perhaps more force than necessary. Let them talk. The truth was simpler and more complicated than gossip allowed. Luke came by most evenings. Yes, but he came to the kitchen's back door with items that needed mending: a torn shirt, a broken bridle, once a pair of chaps with the leather worn through. They would talk while Clara worked, her needle moving steadily through leather or fabric while he sat on the back step, sharing stories of ranch life or asking about her day. Those quiet evenings had become precious to her, though she'd never admit it aloud. Miss Clara, Agnes persisted. Don't you care what they think? Clara finally looked at the girl. When I was your age, I cared desperately what everyone thought. Spent years trying to make myself smaller, quieter, more acceptable. You know what I learned? Agnes shook her head. They'll talk anyway. Might as well give them something interesting to discuss. Clara smiled. Now, fetch the eggs. This bread won't bake itself. The lunch crowd was particularly thick that day. Cowboys from surrounding ranches mixed with townspeople and travelers passing through. Clara had learned to recognize the regulars, their preferences, their payday schedules, even their moods. She was ladling stew when she heard the first raised voice. I don't care who she is. No woman that tall is natural. The speaker was a stranger. His voice slurred with afternoon whiskey. Probably barren as a mule, built like that. Clara's ladle paused for just a moment before continuing its motion. She'd heard worse. Watch your mouth. That was Tom Garrett, one of the miners. Miss Clara's a lady. A lady. The stranger laughed ugly. "Serving food in a saloon that ain't no lady. That's a woman who couldn't find a man desperate enough to—" The crash of an overturned chair cut him off. Through the serving window, Clara saw Luke on his feet, face dark as thunder. "Outside," Luke said quietly. "Now." "Luke, no." Clara found herself in the dining room without remembering the decision to move. "It's not worth it." The stranger turned bleary eyes on her, taking in her full height with a sneer. Well, the giant herself. "Tell me, sweetheart, what's it like knowing no man will ever—" Luke's fist connected with the stranger's jaw before he could finish. The man went down hard, taking a table with him. The room erupted, some men pulling Luke back, others hauling the stranger to his feet. "That's enough," Maudie's voice cut through the chaos. "Tom, Eddie, get that fool out of here. Luke Keenan, you know better than to start fights in my establishment." "He didn't start it." Clara heard her own voice, steady despite the trembling in her hands. "And I'll thank you not to punish him for defending my reputation." The room went quiet. Clara realized she was standing at her full height, chin raised, meeting every curious stare without flinching. "I may be tall," she continued, addressing the room at large. "I may be plain. I may even be all the things that man suggested. But I cook your meals and mend your clothes and ask nothing from any of you but common courtesy. If that's too much to manage, there's a hotel down the street that serves beans from a can." A murmur ran through the crowd. Then, from the back, slow applause started. Others joined in, until most of the room was clapping. The stranger was hauled out, still cursing, and gradually normal conversation resumed. Clara turned to find Luke rubbing his knuckles, a wry smile on his face. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Yeah, I did." He flexed his fingers experimentally. "Man like that needs to learn some manners." "Your hand." "It's fine." He met her eyes. "Are you—" The concern in his voice nearly undid her careful composure. "I should get back to the kitchen." She fled before he could respond, before anyone could see the tears threatening to spill. In the safety of her kitchen, Clara gripped the edge of the prep table and breathed deeply. That was something. Maudie appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "Never seen you speak up like that before." "I'm sorry if I overstepped." "Did I say that?" Maudie's expression was unreadable. "Maybe it's about time someone reminded these fools that cooking their food doesn't make you less than them." It was the closest thing to approval Clara had ever heard from her employer. Maudie turned to go, then paused. "That Luke Keenan's a good man. Fool for starting a fight in my place. But a good man. Don't know if anyone's mentioned that to you." Before Clara could respond, she was gone. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Word of the confrontation spread quickly, as news always did in Dry Bend. Clara noticed differences more please and thank you from the dinner crowd. Fewer crude jokes within her hearing. Dale Hutchins even removed his hat when she came to clear his table. But it was the women who surprised her most. The respectable women of Dry Bend, the shopkeepers' wives, the schoolteacher, the banker's daughter had always ignored her existence. Saloon workers, even cooks, weren't considered proper company. Yet that evening, as Clara walked to the general store for supplies, "Mrs." Patterson called out from her front porch. "Miss Monroe, might I have a word?" Clara approached cautiously. "Mrs." Patterson was the unofficial leader of Dry Bend's small social circle, a position she guarded jealously. "I heard about this afternoon," the older woman said. "About what you said." "I apologize if I—" "No, Mrs." Patterson held up a hand. "That's not— that is, I wanted to say—" She seemed to struggle with words. "My daughter is tall, not as tall as you, but taller than most. She's 15 and miserable about it. Thinks she'll never find a husband. Never fit in." Clara waited. "I wondered. That is, would you consider speaking with her Just letting her see that height doesn't have to mean hiding. It was so unexpected that Clara could only nod. Of course, whenever you'd like. Sunday afternoon after church. I'll be there. Mrs. Patterson smiled a real smile, not the polite grimace Clara usually received. Thank you. And Miss Monroe, that apple pie you made last week, my husband hasn't stopped talking about it. Clara walked back to the saloon in a daze. The world felt different somehow, as if standing up to one drunken fool had shifted something fundamental. She found Luke waiting by the kitchen door, his injured hand wrapped in a bandana. Let me see, she said without preamble. It's nothing. Let me see. He sighed, but held out his hand. The knuckles were swollen, but not seriously damaged. Clara fetched a basin of cool water and a clean cloth. This might sting, she warned, beginning to clean the scrapes. Worth it. His voice was low. Meant only for her. Nobody talks to you like that, not while I'm around. I've heard worse. She kept her eyes on her work. You can't fight everyone who says something cruel. Watch me. The simple declaration made her breath catch. She risked a glance at his face, finding him watching her with those steady gray eyes. Why? The word slipped out before she could stop it. Why do you care what they say about me? Luke was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, carefully, as if the words were fragile, my mother was tall, 5'10" in her bare feet. Heard every cruel thing you could imagine, especially after my father died. She never let it show, but I knew it hurt her. Clara's hand stilled on his. She used to say God made her tall so she could see trouble coming from farther away. A sad smile crossed his face. Didn't help her in the end. Fever took her quick, height and all. But I remember thinking if I ever met another woman who stood tall like that, who faced down the world instead of apologizing for existing, well, I'd make sure she knew someone saw her worth. The kitchen felt too small suddenly, too warm. Clara realized she was still holding his injured hand between both of hers. I should bandage this properly, she managed. All right. Neither of them moved. Outside, someone started playing a fiddle, the melody drifting through the evening air. Clara could hear laughter from the saloon, the normal sounds of dry Ben settling into night. Clara, Luke's voice was soft. That man was wrong. About everything, but especially about no man ever wanting. He cleared his throat. He was wrong. Heat flooded her cheeks. Mr. Keenan. Luke, think we're past formalities. Don't you... Luke. His name felt dangerous on her tongue. You don't have to... I'm not good with words. He turned his hand in hers, lacing their fingers together. Never have been, but I know what I see. And what I see is a woman worth fighting for, worth a few scraped knuckles. Anyway, Clara looked at their joined hands, hers nearly as large as his, both marked by work and weather. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel the need to pull away, to hide, to make herself smaller. Just scraped knuckles. She managed a shaky laugh. I'd have thought I was worth at least a black eye. Next time. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. Though I'd prefer if there wasn't a next time. So would I. She squeezed his hand gently, then released it to reach for bandages. But thank you for standing up for me, for... She gestured helplessly. Everything. Don't thank me yet. He let her wrap his hand, watching her work with those intent gray eyes. Town gossip's about to get a lot worse. Me coming around, defending your honor. They'll have us married by month's end. Let them talk, Clara said, echoing her earlier words to Agnes. Might as well give them something interesting to discuss. Luke's laugh was warm and genuine. That's my girl, tall as a tree and twice as strong. My girl. The words settled around Clara's shoulders like a warm shawl. She finished the bandage and stepped back, needing distance before she did something foolish. You should get some rest, she said. That hand will be sore tomorrow. Worth it, he said again. Standing at the door. He paused. Clara, next Sunday there's a social at the church. Dancing and such. Would you, that is, if you're not opposed. Are you asking me to a social, Luke Keenan? Trying to. He rubbed the back of his neck. Not doing a very good job of it. Yes. Yes, I'm not doing a good job. Or yes, you'll come. Both. She smiled at his expression. Though you might want to practice your dancing. I've been told I'm hard to lead, being so tall. I'll manage. He settled his hat, touching the brim in his usual gesture. Good night, Clara. Good night, Luke. She watched him disappear into the darkness, then closed the door and leaned against it. Her heart was racing like she'd run from one end of Main Street to the other. My girl, worth fighting for. God made her tall so she could see trouble coming. Clara pressed her hands to her burning cheeks. Trouble was coming all right, but not the kind her height would help her spot. This trouble had gray eyes and quiet strength and hands that made hers feel normal-sized. This trouble defended her honor and brought wildflowers and washed dishes without being asked. This trouble was named Luke Keenan and Clara Monroe, for all her height and strength and hard-won independence, had no idea how to fight it. Worse, she wasn't sure she wanted to. The smell of smoke woke Clara before the shouting did. She sat up in bed, disoriented, the acrid scent filling her nostrils. Through her window, an orange glow flickered against the night sky. Fire, fire in the hills. The cry echoed through dry Bend streets. Clara dressed hastily, fingers fumbling with buttons, and rushed downstairs. The saloon was already emptying, men streaming out to help fight the blaze that threatened the town's lifeline, the surrounding ranches, and their precious grazing land. Clara Maudie appeared, hair wild, clutching a shawl around her nightgown. Thank God you're awake. We need to prepare. There'll be injured men coming back, exhausted ones needing food and water. The kitchen. Yes, get it ready. Agnes, she bellowed for her daughter. Start filling every pot and bucket with water. Move. Clara flew to her kitchen, lighting lamps and stoking the stove. Through the window, she could see the orange glow growing brighter, painting the desert in hellish hues. The fire was moving fast, driven by the late summer winds that plagued Nevada this time of year. She began pulling out supplies, bandages improvised from clean dishcloths, salve for burns, pots for boiling water. Her hands moved automatically, years of managing kitchen crises serving her well in this larger emergency. The first riders thundered past, heading toward the flames. Clara caught a glimpse of Luke among them, his face set with determination, her heart clenched. But she pushed the fear aside. There was work to do. Agnes burst in, hauling buckets. Mama says to make coffee, lots of it, and soup if we can manage. Something that'll keep warm for hours. Start on the coffee. Clara directed. I'll handle the rest. They worked in tense harmony, the kitchen filling with steam and purpose. Outside, more riders passed, some on horseback, others in wagons loaded with barrels of water and sand. The entire town was mobilizing. Clara had just set a massive pot of beef broth to simmer when the first casualty arrived, young Jamie Mills. His arm burned and blistered. Got too close to a flaming branch, he gasped as Clara guided him to a chair. Mister, Keenan pulled me back, but... Hush. Clara examined the burn with gentle fingers. Agnes, bring the salve, and clean water. More men arrived as the night wore on. Burns, smoke inhalation, exhaustion. Clara and Agnes worked tirelessly, cleaning wounds, applying salves, forcing water and broth down throats, raw from smoke. Maudie coordinated from the main room, directing men where to rest, organizing fresh supplies to be sent to the fire lines. It was near dawn when Clara heard the words she'd been dreading. Luke Keenan's down someone ride for the doctor. Her hands stilled on the bandage she was wrapping. Agnes looked at her with wide eyes. Go, the girl said softly. I can manage here. Clara didn't need to be told twice. She ran to the front of the saloon where a crowd had gathered. Luke lay on the ground, his face pale beneath the soot, left shoulder at an odd angle. Damn horse spooked, Tom Garrett was explaining. Threw him right into a burning fence post. He got the Paulson family's horses out, but... Move aside? Clara's voice cut through the chatter. She knelt beside Luke, her hand surprisingly steady as she examined him. The shoulder was dislocated. Not broken painful, but not life-threatening. A burn ran along his upper arm, angry and red. Luke, she touched his face gently. Can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open, focusing on her with difficulty. Clara, you're all right. I'm fine. You're the one who decided to fight fire. A weak smile crossed his face. Someone had to save the horses. No, you'd never forgive me if I let them burn. Foolish man. Her voice cracked slightly. Let's get you inside. It took 4 men to carry him to the saloon, Clara hovering anxiously. She directed them to place him on one of the tables she'd cleared, then sent everyone out except Doc Henderson, who'd finally arrived. Dislocated shoulder, the doctor confirmed. This is going to hurt, son. Do it, Luke gritted out. Clara moved without thinking, offering her hand. Luke took it, his grip tightening as Doc Henderson manipulated the joint. There was a sickening pop, and Luke's grip became crushing, but Clara didn't flinch. There, the doctor stepped back. Shoulders back in place. Keep it immobilized for a few weeks. Now, let's see about that burn. Clara helped cut away Luke's ruined shirt, her clinical focus wavering at the sight of his injured arm. The burn was worse than she'd thought, running from shoulder to elbow. This needs proper cleaning, Doc Henderson said. Miss Monroe, I'll need hot water and clean cloths. Can you assist? Of course. What followed was an hour of careful work cleaning the burn, applying salve, wrapping it in clean linen. Luke bore it stoically, though Clara could see the pain in the tightness around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched. When it was over, Doc Henderson packed his bag. Keep the wound clean, change the dressings daily. He's lucky could have been much worse. After the doctor left, Clara found herself alone with Luke for the first time. He lay on the table, exhausted but awake, watching her with those gray eyes. You should rest, she said softly. In a minute. He caught her hand as she turned to go. The horses, did they all make it? Everyone, from what I heard, along with the Paulson family. Good. He closed his eyes briefly. Good. That was incredibly brave and incredibly foolish. Couldn't let them burn. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. Kept thinking about you. Actually, how you stand up to things that scare you. Figured I could face some fire. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I'm not brave. I just hide it better. No. His grip tightened. No. You're the bravest person I know, every day, facing down their looks and words. At least fire's honest about trying to hurt you. She couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Instead, she busied herself adjusting the makeshift pillow under his head, smoothing the blanket someone had thrown over him. Clara, his voice was getting drowsy. Could you stay just until I fall asleep? Of course. She pulled up a chair, their hands still linked, around them. The saloon was filling again with exhausted firefighters. The immediate danger had passed, though smoke still hung heavy in the air. Agnes and Maudie bustled about, serving coffee and food to the weary men. We make a good team, Luke murmured, already half asleep. You and me, both too stubborn to quit. Clara squeezed his hand gently. Rest now. I'll be here. She kept her word, sitting by his side as the sun rose higher, painting the smoke-hazed sky in shades of amber and rose. Men came and went, voices hushed out of respect for the injured. Several stopped to pat Luke's good shoulder, murmuring thanks for his heroics. It was nearly noon when Agnes approached hesitantly. "Miss Clara Mama says you should eat something, and maybe rest. You've been up all night." Clara looked at the girl, then at Luke's sleeping form. His face had regained some color, and his breathing was deep and even. The immediate danger had passed. "You're right," she said, carefully extracting her hand from his. "Will you sit with him? Come get me if he wakes or needs anything." Agnes nodded solemnly. "I'll take good care of him." Clara stood, her body protesting the hours spent in one position. She made her way to the kitchen, mechanically preparing a plate of food she didn't taste. Exhaustion pulled at her, but her mind was too full for sleep. Luke could have died. The thought kept circling, relentless as a buzzard. He could have died saving horses, and she would have... What would she have done? "You love him." Clara startled, nearly dropping her plate. Maudie stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression knowing. "I don't..." "Girl, I've got eyes. The way you two look at each other..." Maudie shook her head. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Clara set down her fork. "I don't know. I came here for work. Not this." "Life's funny that way." Maudie's voice held unexpected gentleness. "Gives you what you need, not always what you think you want." "He could have died," Clara whispered. "But he didn't. And when he wakes up, he's going to need tending. Seems to me that's something you're good at." Before Clara could respond, a commotion erupted from the main room. She hurried out to find Luke trying to sit up, Agnes fluttering anxiously around him. "I'm fine," he was insisting. "Just need to check on the horses." "You'll do no such thing." Clara's voice cut through his protests. "You have a dislocated shoulder and second-degree burns. You're staying right here." Luke's eyes found hers, and his struggle ceased. "Clara, you're still here." Where else would I be? Something passed between them in that look, witnessed by half the town but belonging only to them. Luke settled back, wincing at the movement. "Bossy woman," he muttered, but his eyes were warm. "Foolish man," she countered. "Now, are you going to rest, or do I need to tie you to that table?" A ripple of laughter ran through the gathered men. Someone called out, "Better listen to her. Luke! Woman who can cook like that probably knows knots too." "Speaking of cooking," Clara said, addressing the room, "there's soup and coffee for anyone who needs it. We'll keep the kitchen open all day for the firefighters." A cheer went up. Men began filing toward the kitchen, leaving Clara and Luke in relative privacy. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for staying, for taking care of me." "Always," she said without thinking, then flushed at the implication. Luke's good hand found hers. "I'll hold you to that." The next days passed in a blur of nursing and cooking. Luke proved a terrible patient, constantly trying to do too much too soon. Clara found herself playing enforcer, batting away his attempts to help with chores or check on his horse. "I'm not an invalid," he grumbled on the third day, as she changed his bandages. "No, you're injured. There's a difference, and it's called healing time." She worked carefully, trying not to cause additional pain. "Besides, you're finally making progress on that book. What happens to the cattle thief's daughter?" "She becomes sheriff," he hissed as she applied fresh salve. "Turns out she was framed for her father's crimes. Naturally, strong woman overcomes adversity. I like it." "Thought you might." His eyes tracked her movements. "Clara." "The church socials in 3 days?" Her hand stilled. "Luke, you can't possibly." "I can dance one-armed." At her expression, he added quickly, "Just one dance. Surely Doc Henderson wouldn't object to one dance." "Doc Henderson doesn't get a say. I object." "Please." He caught her hand. "I've been looking forward to it, to dancing with you in front of everyone, showing them all what I already know." "Which is that you're worth 100 of their opinions." His grip tightened. Let me do this. Let me stand beside you, proud as anything, even if I can only manage one dance. Clara felt her resolve weakening.
If you tear those stitches,
You'll lecture me thoroughly. I know. He grinned, looking boyish despite the soot still streaking his hair. Is that a yes?
it's a maybe.
I'll take it. As Clara finished the bandaging, she thought about dancing with Luke in front of the whole town, about declaring, without words, that they were, courting together. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she found herself looking forward to it with an anticipation that warmed her from the inside out. Let them talk, she thought, echoing her new philosophy. But this time, they'd be talking about something wonderful, something worth every whisper and speculation, something that had begun with a borrowed room and a quiet act of kindness, and had grown through shared meals and mended leather and fighting words and fighting fire, something that felt a lot like love. Clara stood before the small mirror in her room, hands trembling as she pinned her hair. The church social would begin in an hour, and despite her brave words about letting people talk, her stomach churned with nerves. The dress had been her one indulgence since arriving in Dry Bend. She'd sewn it herself from fabric purchased with her first wages, a deep blue cotton that brought out the hints of green in her eyes. The style was simple but flattering, the skirt full enough to move in but not so wide as to overwhelm her frame.
You can do this,
she told her reflection.
You've faced down drunkards and fires. You can handle a dance.
A knock at her door interrupted her self-encouragement. Agnes peered in, eyes widening at the sight of Clara in her finery.
Oh, Miss Clara, you look beautiful.
Hardly that. Clara smoothed the skirt nervously.
But presentable, I hope.
More than presentable. Luke won't know what hit him. Agnes grinned. He's downstairs. By the way, been pacing for the last 20 minutes. Clara's heart skipped.
His shoulder seems fine. He's got his arm in a sling, but he's determined.
Agnes's expression grew serious.
Miss Clara, I think it's brave. What you're doing, going to the social with him. Mama says it'll cause talk, but...
She shrugged.
Maybe it's time this town got shaken up a bit.
Clara pulled the girl into a quick hug.
Thank you.
That means more than you know. She descended the stairs carefully, the unfamiliar weight of her good dress making her cautious. The saloon was quiet, most patrons having departed to prepare for the social. Luke stood by the bar, his back to her, good hand drumming nervously against the wood. He wore his best clothes, a black coat over a crisp white shirt, string tie perfectly knotted. His injured arm rested in a clean white sling. Someone, probably Maudie, had trimmed his hair and helped him shave. He looked handsome, Clara said without meaning to. Luke spun around, his eyes going wide. For a long moment, he simply stared, taking in every detail of her appearance. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. Clara Monroe, you take my breath away. Heat flooded her cheeks. It's just a dress. No. He crossed to her, movements careful but determined. No, it's not just anything. It's you, standing there proud as a queen, ready to face down the whole town. He offered his good arm. Shall we go scandalize the good people of Dry Bend? Clara slipped her hand through his arm. I thought you'd never ask. The walk to the church seemed both endless and far too short. People were already gathering, families in their Sunday best despite it being Saturday evening. Conversations faltered as Clara and Luke passed, heads turning to track their progress. They're staring, Clara murmured. Let them. Luke's voice was steady. I want everyone to see us together. Want them to know exactly where I stand. The church hall had been transformed for the occasion. Lanterns cast warm light over the assembled crowd, and someone had strung ribbons from the rafters. A small band fiddle, guitar, and accordion was tuning up in the corner. Tables along one wall groaned under the weight of covered dishes. the pride of Dry Ben's kitchens. The moment they entered, silence fell like a dropped curtain. Clara felt every eye in the room fix on them. Her height had never been more apparent, standing beside Luke with his arm in a sling, both of them clear outsiders to this respectable gathering. She started to lower her gaze, then caught herself. No, she would not make herself smaller. Not anymore. Evening, folks, Luke said easily, as if escorting the saloon cook to the church social was perfectly ordinary. Fine night for dancing. The spell broke. Conversations resumed, though Clara could feel the weight of continued glances. Misses. Patterson approached, her daughter Sarah trailing behind. Miss Monroe, how lovely you look. Her smile seemed genuine. And Mr. Keenan, we heard about your heroics during the fire. How's the shoulder? Mending? Ma'am, thanks for asking. Sarah, Mrs. Patterson nudged her daughter forward. Doesn't Miss Monroe look nice? The girl, all of 15 and already nearly Clara's height, gazed up with something like awe. You made that dress yourself, didn't you? I can tell by the stitching. I did, Clara admitted. Your mother mentioned you so. Sarah lit up. I love it, but patterns never fit right because I'm so... She gestured helplessly at her height. I could show you how to alter them, Clara offered. It's not difficult once you know the tricks. Really, you'd do that? Of course. Come by the saloon. Clara caught herself, glancing at Mrs. Patterson. The kitchen entrance. Mrs. Patterson said firmly. Sunday afternoons would be acceptable. For sewing lessons. Clara could have hugged her. Sunday afternoons it is. More people approached as the evening progressed. Not everyone. Some pointedly turned their backs, but more than Clara had expected. The banker's wife complimented her dress. The schoolteacher asked about her apple pie recipe. Even crusty old Mr. Chen from the laundry nodded respectfully. See? Luke murmured during a break in the socializing. Not everyone in this town is small-minded. No, Clara agreed, watching Dale Hutchins whisper to his cronies in the corner. But enough are... Their loss. Luke squeezed her hand. Dance is starting soon. You ready? The band struck up a lively reel before Clara could answer. Couples took to the floor, the hall filling with music and laughter. Clara watched wistfully. She loved dancing but had rarely had the chance, being taller than most partners. Next one, Luke promised. This shoulder won't survive a reel, but I can manage a waltz. True to his word, when the band shifted to a slower melody, Luke led her onto the floor. Clara was acutely aware of the stares, the whispers, the space other couples gave them. Eyes on me, Luke said softly. Just you and me. Clara, no one else matters. She looked down at him. Yes, down. She was taller, and there was no hiding it, and saw nothing but warmth in his gray eyes. His injured arm couldn't hold her properly, but his good hand was steady on her waist. And somehow they made it work. I'm not good at this, she warned as they began to move. Neither am I. We'll muddle through together. And they did. It wasn't graceful. Luke's injury threw off their balance, and Clara had to consciously make herself not lead. But there was something perfect about it anyway. The two of them finding their rhythm, creating their own dance that had nothing to do with proper steps. You know what I realized? Luke said as they turned carefully. What? Your height means I can look straight into your eyes while we dance. No craning my neck, no standing on tiptoes, just this. Clara's breath caught. He was right. Their faces were level, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. Smell the soap he'd used. That almost makes it worth it, she said, trying for lightness. Almost. He spun her gently. Clara Monroe, your height is part of you, and I happen to be partial to all of you. Every stubborn, talented, beautiful inch. She missed a step, nearly treading on his foot. Luke! I mean it. You walk into a room and people notice. Not because you're tall, but because you're remarkable. The height just makes it harder for them to pretend otherwise. The music was ending. Clara knew she should step away, maintain proper distance. Instead, she found herself leaning closer. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me, not despite everything, but because of it." The last note faded. For a moment, they stood frozen, the rest of the hall fading away. Then reality intruded in the form of Dale Hutchins's carrying voice. "Well, ain't that sweet? The giant and the cripple. What's next? The saloon girl teaching Sunday school." Luke tensed, but Clara placed a hand on his good arm. "Don't! He's not worth it." "Listen to your woman, Keenan." Dale swaggered closer, his friends flanking him. Though woman might be stretching it, more like a... "Dale Hutchins, you shut your mouth this instant." Everyone turned. Maudie Griggs stood in the doorway, Agnes beside her, both in their best dresses. The saloon owner's face was thunder. "You got something to say about my cook, you say it to me." Maudie advanced on Dale like a small, furious storm. "Clara Monroe has more class in her little finger than you've got in your whole worthless body." "Now, Maudie." "Don't you now Maudie me. This woman saves your sorry hide from starvation every day. And this is how you repay her, by insulting her at a church social." She looked around the room. "Any of you got a problem with Miss Monroe, you can find somewhere else to eat. See how you like the hotel's beans and hardtack." A murmur ran through the crowd. The hotel's food was notoriously bad, and everyone knew it. Doc Henderson stepped forward. "I, for one, am grateful to Miss Monroe. Best food this town's ever seen. And she helped tend the wounded during the fire without complaint." He looked pointedly at Dale. "Which is more than some did." "Here, here," someone called out. Others joined in, voices rising in agreement. Dale's face flushed ugly red. "You're all fools if you think—" "I think you should leave." The voice belonged to Reverend Palmer, quiet but firm. "This is a social event, Mr. Hutchins. If you cannot be civil, you're not welcome." Dale looked around, finding fewer allies than he'd expected. With a muttered curse, he stomped out, his cronies trailing behind. In the silence that followed, Clara found herself surrounded by unexpected support. The banker's wife pressed her hand. Tom Garrett clapped Luke on his good shoulder. Even some who'd snubbed her earlier nodded respectfully. "Well, Mrs. Patterson said loudly, I believe the dancing should continue. Mr. Chen, would you honor me with a waltz?" The elderly laundryman grinned and offered his arm. Other couples followed suit, and soon the floor was full again. Clara stood in the middle of it all, overwhelmed. "You all right?" Luke asked softly. I think so." She looked around the room, seeing it with new eyes. "They stood up for me." "Course they did. You're one of us now. Have been since you stayed past that first Thursday train." He winced, adjusting his sling. "Though I think I need to sit for a bit. Doc Henderson will have my hide if I overdo it." They found seats along the wall, Luke's hand finding hers as they watched the dancers. Agnes brought them punch, beaming like she'd personally orchestrated the evening's events. "Did you see Mama?" she whispered. "I've never seen her so fierce." "She was magnificent," Clara agreed. "She likes you, you know. Won't admit it, but she does." Agnes grinned. "She even made me help her pick out this dress. Said if her cook was brave enough to come to the social, the least she could do was show up in support." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. After weeks of Maudie's gruffness, this gesture of solidarity meant more than she could express. The evening wound on, full of small victories and smaller kindnesses. Clara danced twice more, once with Doc Henderson, who proved surprisingly graceful, and once with young Jamie Mills, who turned scarlet but managed not to step on her feet. She helped serve refreshments, accepting compliments on her contribution, a towering layer cake that had taken all afternoon. She even found herself in conversation with several of the town's ladies, discussing everything from recipes to the best fabric suppliers in Carson City. When the social finally ended, Clara walked back to the saloon on Luke's arm, both of them pleasantly exhausted.
Thank you,
she said as they reached the kitchen door.
for asking me, for standing beside me, for everything.
Thank you for saying yes. He touched her cheek gently. For being brave enough to show this town who you really are.
I'm not sure I know who that is yet,
Clara admitted. I do. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. You're Clara Monroe, best cook in Nevada, fierce defender of girls who need teaching, woman who stands tall and makes others want to stand taller. He smiled. And the lady I'm proud to walk beside. Clara couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Instead, she did something that would have horrified her proper Ohio upbringing. She leaned down and kissed him,
soft and sweet, right there in the street where anyone could see.
When they parted, Luke's eyes were dazed. Miss Monroe, he said, voice not quite steady, you are full of surprises. Good ones, I hope.
The very best ones.
He squeezed her hand.
Same time next month. The church social, my shoulders should be healed by then. I can dance properly.
It's a date, Clara said, then blushed at her boldness. Yes, Luke agreed, grinning. It certainly is. He waited until she was safely inside before heading to wherever he slept these days. Clara climbed the stairs to her room, feeling as if she were floating. The evening hadn't been perfect. Dale's nastiness proved some minds wouldn't change easily, but it had been something better than perfect. It had been a beginning. She unpinned her hair, humming the waltz they'd danced to. Through her window, she could see Luke's silhouette heading toward the livery stable. He turned at the corner, looking back, and she knew he could see her lamp-lit form. She raised her hand. He touched his hat brim in response. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would still be stares and whispers. Those who thought a tall woman and a quiet cowboy had no business together. But tonight had proven something important. They weren't alone. They had allies, friends, a community slowly learning to see past its own prejudices. And they had each other. Clara smiled. Letting the curtain fall, that was more than enough. That was everything. The morning started like any other, with Clara preparing breakfast for the early crowd. But something felt different in the air, a tension that made the horses skittish and the miners quieter than usual. Even the coffee seemed to percolate nervously. She was just pulling biscuits from the oven when Agnes burst through the kitchen door, face flushed with excitement and something else worry.
He's here,
the girl gasped.
Got off the morning stage. He's asking for you.
Clara's hand stilled.
Who's asking for me?
Harvey Boone. And Miss Clara. He's got a woman with him. A fancy lady from San Francisco. The biscuits nearly slipped from Clara's grasp. Harvey hadn't visited since that day with the investors, seemingly content to collect profits from afar. Why now? And who was this woman?
Tell him I'll be out shortly,
Clara said, forcing calm into her voice.
I need to finish the breakfast service first.
Agnes nodded and scurried away. Clara continued working, but her mind raced. Through the serving window, she caught glimpses of the main room. Harvey sat at the best table, his city clothes marking him as sharply as a brand. Beside him sat a woman in emerald silk, her golden hair arranged in elaborate curls that had never known desert wind. Clara sent out the last of the breakfast plates and removed her apron. No point in delaying. She smoothed her hair and stepped into the dining room. Ah, Miss Monroe. Harvey rose smoothly, his smile not reaching his eyes. Allow me to introduce Mrs. Victoria Ashford. She's come all the way from San Francisco to see our little operation. Mrs. Ashford extended a gloved hand as if expecting Clara to kiss it. Clara shook it briefly instead. The woman's perfect features contracted slightly, like she'd tasted something sour. "Charming, Mrs." Ashford murmured, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Harvey has told me so much about you, the cook who saved his investment. I simply do my job, ma'am." "Yes, about that." Harvey gestured for Clara to sit. She remained standing. "Mrs. Ashford is interested in expanding our operation. She owns several establishments in San Francisco. Establishments that cater to a more refined clientele." "Mrs." Ashford added. When Harvey mentioned his surprisingly successful saloon cook, I simply had to see for myself. Clara felt like a horse being examined for purchase. "I see. Do you, Mrs.?" Ashford's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I'm prepared to offer you a position in San Francisco, triple your current wages, accommodations provided, and the chance to cook for people who can truly appreciate culinary arts." The room had gone quiet. Clara could feel every eye on her, including Luke's from where he sat near the bar. "That's a generous offer," Clara said carefully. "It's more than generous, it's the opportunity of a lifetime." "Mrs." Ashford leaned forward. "Let's be honest, Miss Monroe, you're wasting your talents in this dusty little town. Cooking for miners and cowboys. You could be preparing meals for senators, business magnates, the cream of society." "The cream of society," Clara repeated. "Tell me, Mrs. Ashford, would I be serving these meals or cooking them?" A flicker of irritation crossed the woman's face. "I don't understand." "It's a simple question. In your refined establishments, would I be the cook the senators never see, hidden away in the kitchen, or would I be welcomed at their tables?" "Mrs." Ashford's laugh tinkled like breaking crystal. "My dear girl, let's not get ahead of ourselves. You're hardly that is, there are certain expectations in society, certain standards. You mean I'm too tall, too plain, too much?" "I wouldn't put it so crudely, but yes, your appearance is unfortunate. In the kitchen, of course, it wouldn't matter. And think of the prestige cooking for the finest families in California." Clara felt the old familiar sting, but also something new anger, clean and sharp, hidden away like a shameful secret. "You mean—" "Clara," Harvey's voice held warning. "Mrs. Ashford is offering you a chance to better yourself." "Better myself." Clara looked around the room, at the faces she'd come to know. Tom Garrett with his preference for eggs over easy, the Paulson brothers who always wanted extra bacon, Doc Henderson nodding encouragingly from his corner table, and Luke, his gray eyes steady on hers. "Mr. Boone," Clara said, her voice carrying clearly. "I have letters from your own hand, promising me a position as cook in Dry Bend, a position I have filled admirably, as your profits will show." Harvey's face darkened. "Those letters were preliminary, before we knew about your limitations." "My limitations?" Clara straightened to her full height. "You mean the limitations that didn't prevent me from saving your investment, from turning your failing saloon into the most popular eating establishment in town. Now see here." "No, you see here." Clara's voice rose. "I was good enough when you were desperate, good enough when your investors needed impressing. But now that I've proven myself, suddenly I'm too tall, too plain, too unfortunate for anything better than a back kitchen in San Francisco." "Mrs." Ashford stood abruptly. "Harvey, I didn't come all this way to be insulted by the help." "The help!" Maudie's voice cut through like a blade. She stood behind the bar, arms crossed, face thunderous. "That help has made this place worth 10 times what it was. And she's done it honest, without hiding who she is." "As if you have any say," Harvey began. "Actually, I do." Maudie pulled out a document. "Had my lawyer look over our agreement after your last visit. Turns out I've got more say than you thought, including the right to hire and fire staff." Harvey went pale. "You can't." "I can and I will. Clara stays, or I walk. And good luck finding another manager willing to work for what you pay." The silence that followed was deafening. "Mrs." Ashford gathered her silk skirts like armor. "This is ridiculous. Harvey, when you're ready to discuss real business with civilized people, you know where to find me." She swept toward the door, pausing beside Clara. "Such a waste," she murmured, loud enough for all to hear. "You could have been somebody. Instead, you'll die in this dusty nothing town, serving beans to nobodies." "Maybe," Clara said evenly. "But I'll do it standing tall, not crawling on my knees for your approval." "Mrs." Ashford's perfect features twisted with spite. "You think that cowboy actually wants you? You think any man could want?" She gestured at Clara's height. "Men like pretty little things they can protect, not Amazons who can look them in the eye." "You're wrong." Luke's voice was quiet but firm. He stood slowly, favoring his healing shoulder. "Dead wrong, ma'am." "Am I, Mrs.?" Ashford's laugh was ugly now. And what would a crippled ranch hand know about it? Luke crossed the room with steady purpose, stopping beside Clara. Without hesitation, he took her hand in his. "I know that Clara Monroe is worth a dozen of your San Francisco society belles. I know she faces down challenges that would send you running for your smelling salts. And I know," he looked up at Clara, his eyes warm, "I know I'm the luckiest man in Nevada to stand beside her." "Pretty words, Mrs." Ashford sneered. "But when the novelty wears off—" "Ma'am," Luke interrupted. "I'm going to say this once. You've insulted the woman I intend to marry. You can leave now, with what dignity you've got left. Or I can have the boys help you out. Your choice." Clara's heart stopped. Had he just said, "Marry," Harvey sputtered. "You can't be serious. Serious as a rattlesnake." Luke's grip on Clara's hand tightened. "Been meaning to do this proper, but seems like now's the time." He looked up at Clara, a question in his eyes. "If she'll have me, that is." The room held its breath. Clara looked down at this man who'd given up his room for her, who'd defended her honor, who'd fought fire and faced down society for her. This man who saw her height as a blessing, not a curse. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll have you." The room erupted. Cheers, applause, boots stomping approval on wooden floors. "Mrs." Ashford made a disgusted sound and flounced out, Harvey trailing behind her, threats of legal action floating in their wake. But Clara didn't care. She was too busy being kissed by Luke Keenan in front of half the town, his good arm pulling her down to meet him, neither of them caring who saw. When they finally parted, both breathless, Agnes was bouncing with excitement. "A wedding! Oh, Miss Clara, can I help with your dress?" "Course you can," Clara managed, still dazed. "If your mother approves." "Approves," Maudie snorted. But she was fighting a smile. "Girl, I'm giving you the wedding breakfast as my gift. Least I can do after all you've done for this place." More congratulations followed. Hands to shake, backs to pat. Through it all, Luke stayed beside her, their fingers intertwined. Finally, the breakfast crowd dispersed, leaving them alone in the kitchen. Clara sank onto a stool, overwhelmed. "Did you mean it?" she asked. "About marriage? Or were you just trying to put Mrs. Ashford in her place?" Luke cupped her face in his good hand. "Clara Monroe, I've wanted to marry you since the day you stood up to Maudie with flour in your hair and fire in your eyes. Just been waiting for the right moment. And insulting city ladies are your idea of romance. Seemed as good a time as any." His thumb brushed her cheek. "Besides, couldn't let her talk to you like that. Not my girl, not the woman who's going to be my wife." "Your very tall wife," Clara said, old insecurities surfacing. "My perfect wife," Luke corrected. "Who I can look in the eye when I tell her I love her. Like now." His gray eyes were serious. "I love you, Clara. Every inch, every recipe, every stubborn bone in your body. Clara felt tears slide down her cheeks. I love you too, though Lord knows why. You're reckless and stubborn, and you can't leave a heroic deed undone. Perfect match, then. He grinned. 2 mules too stubborn to quit. Clara laughed, watery but genuine. What about Harvey? He might make trouble. Let him try. Maudie's got the law on her side, and the town's got your back. Saw that clear enough today? Luke stood, wincing slightly. Now, I believe you've got lunch to prepare, and I've got a ring to buy. Luke Keenan, don't you dare spend your savings. Woman, you just agreed to marry me. Least I can do is get you a proper ring. He kissed her quickly. No arguments. I've got months of wages saved up from not paying for that room. He was gone before she could protest further. Clara sat in her kitchen trying to process the morning's events. She'd turned down a fortune, been insulted by a society woman, and gotten engaged all before noon. Agnes peeked in. Miss Clara, there's a line of folks wanting to congratulate you. And Mrs. Patterson says to tell you she's organizing a quilting bee for your wedding linens. Clara stood, smoothing her skirts. She had work to do, a lunch crowd to feed, a future to plan. But first, Agnes, that offer from Mrs. Ashford, do you think I was foolish to refuse? The girl's eyes went wide. Foolish, Miss Clara. You stood up to her like a warrior. You showed her that we don't need her approval or her fancy establishments. We've got something better here. Which is home, Agnes said simply. And family. Even if it's the kind you choose instead of the kind you're born to. Clara hugged the girl impulsively. When did you get so wise? Must be all those cooking lessons, Agnes said, grinning. Now come on. Your public awaits. Clara squared her shoulders and walked back into the dining room, where indeed a crowd had gathered, as she accepted congratulations and answered questions about wedding plans. She thought about Mrs. Ashford's parting words. Die in this dusty nothing town, serving beans to nobodies. Maybe she would, but she'd do it as Clara Keenan, beloved wife, respected cook, and valued member of a community that had chosen to embrace her rather than hide her away. That sounded like a life worth living, a life worth standing tall for. And when Luke returned an hour later with a simple gold band that fit perfectly, Clara knew she'd made the right choice. Not the easy choice, not the profitable choice, but the right one. The choice that led home. The town meeting had been called for Thursday evening, and the usual quiet mumble of Dry Bend had turned into a roar of debate. Clara stood at the back of the packed church hall, Luke beside her, listening as voices rose in anger and argument. It's progress. Harvey Boone stood at the podium, his city polish somewhat tarnished after the morning's embarrassment, but his determination intact. The Consolidated Mining Company wants to build their processing plant right here in Dry Bend. Think of the jobs. The prosperity. Think of the water, old Sam Hendricks shot back. That plant'll poison every well from here to Carson City. Clara had seen the plans, spread out on the saloon tables where men studied them over whiskey. The proposed plant would sit upstream from town, processing ore with chemicals that would leach into the groundwater. But it would also bring workers, money, growth things a frontier town desperately needed. Miss Monroe should speak. The voice belonged to Mrs. Patterson, clear and unexpected. She's got a stake in this too. Heads turned. Clara felt the familiar weight of stares, but also something new expectation. Respect. These people wanted to hear her opinion. I'm just a cook, Clara began. Who serves water to half this town every day? Someone called out. If it's poisoned, you'll know first. Luke squeezed her hand encouragingly. Clara stepped forward, moving through the crowd that parted for her like a biblical sea. I've read the plans, she said, reaching the front. May I? Harvey's jaw tightened, but he stepped aside. Clara faced the assembly, drawing on the same courage that had carried her through Mrs. Ashford's insults. The plant would bring jobs. Yes, but what good are wages if the water makes our children sick? She thought of the families she served daily, the miners' wives who counted pennies for their children's meals. I've seen what bad water does. In Cincinnati, where I worked before, a factory poisoned 3 blocks of wells. Children died. Is that the prosperity we want? Sentimental nonsense, Harvey interjected. The company assures us.
The company assures profits.
Clara cut him off.
For themselves, not for Dry Bend.
She pulled out a paper calculations she'd worked on with Doc Henderson. I've done the arithmetic. The taxes from the plant would bring in maybe $1,000 a year to the town. But if our water goes bad, every family will need to buy clean water, shipped in. At minimum prices, that's $2,000 a year, just for drinking water, not counting livestock, not counting crops. A murmur ran through the crowd. Numbers they understood. Numbers didn't lie. Furthermore, Clara continued, warming to her topic. Half the ranches depend on the same water table. Poison that, and we lose the beef that supplies not just our tables, but contracts all the way to Sacramento. Ask the Paulson brothers what their cattle contracts are worth. $20,000 a year, Jim Paulson called out. And that's just us. But the jobs, Harvey tried again, will go to experienced miners they bring in from outside. Clara said, oh, they'll hire a few locals for the dangerous work, the kind that ruins lungs and breaks backs. I've cooked for enough miners to know the difference between a fair operation and exploitation. She looked around the room, meeting eyes. We have something good here. Not perfect, not rich, but good. Clean air, clean water. A place where families can grow. Why poison that for promises from men who'll never drink our water or breathe our air? Because it's business, Harvey exploded. This is how towns grow. You can't stop progress. Is it progress if we have to bury our children? The question came from Mary Garrett, Tom's wife, who rarely spoke in public. Is it progress if my husband comes home coughing up black blood like his brother did from that mine in Virginia City? The room erupted, voices for and against, arguing over each other. Through it all, Clara noticed Luke making his way to different groups, speaking quietly, his words carrying weight with the ranchers and cowboys. Finally, Reverend Palmer called for order. We'll put it to a vote, all in favor of approving the plant. Hands rose Harvey's. Some of the shopkeepers who saw only customer dollars. A few young men dazzled by the thought of factory wages. Clara counted quickly, maybe 15. All opposed. A forest of hands shot up. Ranchers, miners who knew the true cost of industrial progress. Wives and mothers, even Maudie Griggs, who rarely attended town meetings. The measure fails. Reverend Palmer announced, by a significant margin. Harvey's face went purple. You'll regret this, all of you. This town will dry up and blow away without investment. Maybe, Clara said, stepping forward again. Or maybe we'll find our own way to grow. Clean ways. Honorable ways. And what would a saloon cook know about it? Harvey sneered. This saloon cook knows about feeding people safely, about water that doesn't kill and air that doesn't choke, about building community one meal at a time instead of poisoning it for profit. Clara stood at her full height, unashamed. And apparently, this saloon cook knows math better than you do. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Harvey gathered his papers with shaking hands. This isn't over, he snarled. I have contracts, agreements. Which you'll honor, Luke said, appearing at Clara's side. Or we'll find a judge who'll make you. Plenty of lawyers in Carson City who'd love to take a bite out of a San Francisco investor. Harvey stormed out, followed by his few supporters. The meeting dissolved into excited chatter. People surrounded Clara, shaking her hand, thanking her for speaking up. Never figured a woman for understanding business, one rancher admitted. But those numbers, that was smart thinking. My wife's got a head for figures, Luke said proudly, among other talents. Wife, Clara blushed. Not yet. Soon enough, he grinned. Though after tonight, Might need to add town advisor to your list of duties. As they walked back to the saloon through the cool evening air, Clara reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. From desperate spinster fleeing Ohio to respected voice in town affairs, and all because she'd been too stubborn to get back on that train. You were magnificent, Luke said. The way you laid out those numbers made them see sense. Harvey didn't know what hit him. I was terrified, Clara admitted. All those people looking at me, expecting wisdom I'm not sure I have. You have it. Luke stopped walking, turning to face her. Clara, you see things clear. No prettying up the truth, no hiding from hard facts. That's wisdom enough for any town. I just didn't want to see Dry Bend poisoned for profit. This place. She looked around at the familiar buildings, the dusty streets she'd grown to love. This place gave me a chance when I had nothing. I owe it protection in return. And me? Luke's voice was soft. What do you owe me? Clara smiled, touching his face. Everything. Nothing. A lifetime of good meals and mended shirts and probably more arguments than either of us can count. Sounds perfect. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Though you forgot one thing. What's that? Dancing. I owe you proper dancing, with both arms working. He demonstrated, wrapping both arms around her waist. Like this. They swayed there in the street. No music but the evening wind and distant saloon piano. Clara rested her forehead against his, marveling at how right it felt. People are probably watching, she murmured. Let them. Luke pulled her closer. Let them see a man dancing with his intended. Let them see Clara Monroe claiming her place in this town, one victory at a time. Clara Keenan, she corrected. Soon enough. Music to my ears. He spun her gently. Though you know tonight won't be the end of it. Harvey'll be back, or men like him. There's always someone wanting to profit off places like Dry Bend. Then we'll face them together. The town seems inclined to listen to sense, even when it comes from an uppity saloon cook. Especially then. Luke's expression grew serious. Clara, what you did tonight, speaking up like that, making them see, you changed things, changed how they see you, how they see themselves. That's powerful. Clara thought about the women who'd thanked her afterward, about Mary Garrett finding her voice, about the way even hardened ranchers had nodded at her words. Maybe that's why I'm here, she said slowly. Not just to cook, but to stand up, to show others they can stand too. Philosophy from my practical Clara, Luke teased, but his eyes were warm. What's next? Poetry. Don't push your luck. But she was smiling. Come on, I need to start tomorrow's bread, and you need to rest that shoulder. They walked on, hand in hand, toward the saloon that had become Clara's kingdom. Behind them, the church hall still buzzed with conversation. The vote had been about more than just a plant. It had been about choosing their future, defining their values. And a tall woman from Ohio had helped them see the choice clearly. As Clara pushed open the kitchen door, breathing in the familiar sense of her domain, she felt a deep satisfaction. She'd found her place at last, not just as cook or future wife, but as a voice for the community that had embraced her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would always be Harvey Boons in the world, men who saw only profit where others saw home. But tonight, Dry Bend had chosen clean water over easy money, community health over industrial wealth. And Clara Monroe, soon to be Keenan, had helped them make that choice. She smiled, reaching for her apron. Time to start that bread. A town that stood up for itself deserved the best biscuits she could make come morning. Luke settled on his usual stool, content to watch her work. Proud of you, he said simply. Clara's hands didn't pause in their measuring, but her heart swelled. Proud of us, she corrected. All of us. Outside, Dry Bend settled into sleep, secure in its choices. The water would run clean tomorrow. The children would play safely. And in the kitchen of the Silver Dollar Saloon, Clara Monroe kneaded bread for the town that had become her home, her family, her future. It was more than enough. It was everything. Clara stood in the room that had become truly hers. Autumn light filtering through curtains she'd sewn herself. The space had transformed over the months. Luke's abandoned belongings long since cleared away, replaced by touches that spoke of a life being built rather than merely endured. On the small table sat an envelope, delivered that morning by the weekly stage. Clara recognized Luke's careful handwriting and smiled. He'd been away for 3 days, helping drive cattle to the railroad, but he'd still found time to write. She opened it carefully, finding not a letter, but a deed. Her breath caught as she read the details: a plot of land just outside town, with good water access and enough space for a house, a garden, maybe even a small barn. A second paper fluttered out. This one was simpler, written in Luke's hand. "If you still need a place to sleep, I'll build you one. But I hope you'll let me stay too. You're Luke." Clara sank onto the bed, overwhelmed. He'd remembered. That first note he'd left with the wildflowers, turned into a promise of a future together. "Miss Clara," Agnes knocked softly.
"Luke's back. He's downstairs asking for you."
Clara tucked the deed carefully into her drawer and descended. The lunch crowd had cleared out, leaving only a few regulars nursing coffee. Luke stood by the window, trail dust still on his clothes, hat in his hands. When he saw her, his face broke into that smile that still made her heart skip. "Hello, beautiful." "Luke Keenan, you can't just buy land without discussing—"
"Can't I?"
He crossed to her, reaching up to touch her cheek. Figured my future wife deserved more than a room above a saloon. Figured she deserved a home. "I have a home," Clara said softly.
"Wherever you are."
"Now you're going to make me emotional in front of the boys," Luke murmured, but his eyes were suspiciously bright. "Did you see the land? It's the old Mitchell place. Near enough to walk to town, but far enough for quiet. Good soil for a garden, strong trees for building." "Building," Clara's voice caught. "You mean?" "A house, our house." He pulled her closer, voice dropping. "Big kitchen with windows facing east so you get morning light. Bedroom with a view of the mountains. Maybe a room or two extra for later." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks at the implication. "Luke Keenan, we're not even married yet." "About that." He grinned. "Reverend Palmer says he's free next Saturday, unless you need more time." "Next Saturday?" Clara's mind raced.
"That's 8 days away."
"Too soon," concern flickered across his face. "We can wait if—" "No." Clara surprised herself with the firmness of her response. "No, I've waited 28 years to find where I belong. I'm not waiting any longer." Luke's kiss was answer enough. There in the saloon with half of Dry Bend pretending not to watch. When they parted, Agnes was bouncing with excitement, already listing everything that needed doing. The next week passed in a whirlwind. Mrs. Patterson organized the church flowers. Maudie grudgingly admitted she'd been planning the wedding feast for weeks. Even Doc Henderson got involved, offering his buggy for transportation. Clara's wedding dress came together in the evenings, with Agnes and 3 other young women helping with the sewing. It wasn't silk or satin. Clara had chosen sturdy blue wool that would serve for Sundays after, but with careful tucks and good buttons. It flattered her tall frame rather than hiding it. "You look like a queen." Sarah Patterson breathed when Clara tried it on. The girl had grown another inch and was handling it better since their talks.
"I look like myself,"
Clara corrected gently.
"Just a fancier version."
The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cool. Perfect autumn weather. Clara woke in a room above the saloon for the last time as a single woman. Tonight, she'd sleep in the hotel Maudie's wedding gift, and tomorrow, she and Luke would start planning their house. Agnes helped her dress, hands steady despite her excitement. "I'm going to miss you being right upstairs," the girl admitted.
I'll still be here every day, Clara promised. Someone has to keep Maudie from poisoning the customers with her cooking. I heard that, Maudie called from the hallway, but her tone was fond. The church was fuller than Clara had ever seen it. It seemed all of Dry Bend had turned out, even Dale Hutchins skulking in a back pew. The altar bloomed with autumn flowers goldenrod, late roses, and sage from the desert. But Clara had eyes only for Luke, standing at the front in his best suit, looking at her like she was the sunrise after a long night. She walked down the aisle on Tom Garrett's arm. The miner had volunteered when he learned her father was gone, but she felt like she was floating. "You came," Luke murmured when she reached him. "Where else would I be?" Reverend Palmer smiled at them both. "Dearly beloved, we gather today to witness something this town has been expecting for months now." Gentle laughter rippled through the congregation. Clara barely heard the familiar words, too lost in Luke's gray eyes, in the warmth of his hands holding hers. "Do you, Clara Monroe, take this man?" "I do." The words came out firm and certain, ringing in the small church. Luke's vows were equally sure, his voice carrying to the back pews. When Reverend Palmer pronounced them husband and wife, Luke had to reach up to kiss her, but neither of them minded. The church erupted in cheers that probably scandalized proper ceremonies back east. But this wasn't back east. This was Dry Bend, where a too-tall spinster had found her place and her person. The reception filled the saloon to bursting. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Maudie had outdone herself. With help from half the town's wives, Clara's wedding cake, which she'd insisted on making herself, towered 3 layers high. "My wife," Luke kept saying, like he was testing the words. "My brilliant, beautiful, brave wife." "My husband," Clara responded each time, feeling the same wonder. As evening fell, couples began dancing to the fiddle and accordion. Luke led Clara onto the floor, both arms working perfectly now, holding her like she was spun from gold. "No more sleeping under stars?" Clara asked as they swayed. "Well, maybe sometimes, but mostly in our bed, in our house, on our land." He spun her carefully. "That sound good, Mrs. Keenan." "That sounds perfect, Mr. Keenan." They danced until her feet hurt, talked until her voice went hoarse, laughed until her cheeks ached. Friends and neighbors offered congratulations, advice, gentle teasing. Even Harvey Boone's absence couldn't dampen the joy he'd left town after the vote, muttering about ungrateful peasants. As the evening wound down, Clara found herself in her kitchen one last time, Agnes beside her. "Feels strange," the girl said. "You not being our cook anymore." "I'm still your cook, just a married cook now." Clara hugged her. "And you're still my student. We'll start on pastries next week." "Really? Really? Can't have my replacement not knowing how to make a proper pie crust." Agnes beamed. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't." Luke appeared in the doorway. "Ready, Mrs. Keenan, our chariot awaits." Clara took one last look around the kitchen where she'd proven herself, where she'd found her strength. Then she took her husband's hand and walked into her future. The hotel room was simple but clean, with fresh flowers on the table, Maudie's touch. Clara stood by the window, looking out at the town that had become home. "Regrets?" Luke asked, coming up behind her. "Never." She leaned back against him. "This morning I woke up alone in a borrowed room. Tonight I'm here with you. Tomorrow we start building our life together. How could I regret any of that?" "When you put it that way," he turned her to face him. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Only a dozen times." "Not nearly enough then." He cupped her face. "I love you, Clara Keenan, every stubborn, talented, beautiful inch of you. And I love you, Luke Keenan, every patient, kind, heroic bit of you." They stood there in the lamplight, 2 people who'd found each other against all odds in a dusty Nevada town,
Tomorrow would bring work plans to draw, foundations to dig, a life to build. But tonight was theirs, the first of thousands they'd share. Clara smiled, thinking of that scared woman who'd stepped off the train months ago. Expecting nothing but silence, she'd found so much more acceptance, purpose, love, and most importantly, home. Not bad for a too-tall spinster from Ohio. Not bad at all. As Luke drew her close, Clara sent up a silent prayer of thanks for Dry Bend, for stubborn Maudie Griggs, for burned shoulders and mended leather and church socials, for every moment that had led her here, to this man, to this life, to home. Thank you for joining me on Clara and Luke's journey in this Wild West love story. I hope their tale of courage, acceptance, and finding love in unexpected places touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. Where are you listening to this story from? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to know if you're enjoying this from a big city, a small town like Dry Bend, or somewhere in between. Let's connect and share our thoughts about Clara's transformation and the beautiful lesson that sometimes home isn't where you come from, but where you choose to stand tall. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 for more tales of love, adventure, and courage from the American frontier. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button. Your support helps these stories reach more listeners who appreciate authentic historical romance. Until our next adventure in the Old West, partners.